iyong buong tapang harapin ang buhay, yakapin ang tagumpay. Tulungan ang kapwa at bigyang halaga, huwag hatakin ng pababa. Isipin huwag sana ang sarili lang, pakisama't bayanihan. Subukan nating isulong at ligawan ang magandang bukas. Ikaw at ako magkasama tayo, salubungin ang kinabukasan. Hawakan ng aking kamay, sabay abutin natin ang tagumpay. Patuloy lang tayo sa pagpapanday, tiwala sa Diyos ang sandat at gabay. Subukan nating isulong at ligawan ang magandang bukas. Ikaw at ako magkasama tayo, salubungin ang kinabukasan.
Alab ng puso, sa dibdib ko'y buhay. Hindi sumusuko sa hirap matlumbay. Sa mga manlulupi, hindi pasisi. Duyan ang magigiti, hindi papi. Kabuti ay batid, limandan namang taon ng daluyot yanig. Tayo bumabangon, isang puso pa rin, isang alab sa dilim. Iba't iba man ang mga bituin sa isang kalawakan magniningning. Magkahawak kamay sa lilim ng bughaw na langit, umaawit. Mabaon man sa putik matapos ang bagyo, lahat magkakapit-bisig, patuloy na sumusulong isang puso pa rin, isang alam sa dilim. Iba't iba man ang mga bituin sa isang kalawakan magniningning. Magkahawak kamay sa lilim na bughaw ng langit. Umaga pabiling, dili magpapildi, dungganing awiton, dili mapahilom. 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 Isang puso pa rin, isang alam sa dilim. Iba't iba man ang mga bituin sa isang kalawakan magniningning. Magkahawak kamay sa lilim ng bughaw ng langit, umaawit. Umaawit. Alam ng puso.
Mandirigmang Pilipino, dakila ang lahi ko, bayaning Pilipino sa makabagong panahon.
History researcher who from the National Historical Commission of the Philippines and a member of the National Quincentennial Secretariat. Welcome again to the Countdown to 500 Online Lectures, a special program brought to you by the Office of the President of the Philippines and the National Quincentennial Committee in anticipation of the 2021 Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines. This is a series online lectures, which aims to sustain the Filipinos' interest to the 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan, the Philippine part in the first circumnavigation of the world, and other related events in 2021 in this time of COVID-19 pandemic. Maraming salamat po sa lahat ng patuloy na sumusubaybay sa ating mga programa. Gayon din sa mga katuwang na ahensya na kagawin namin upang mas matutuparan ng programang ito. Ang National Historical Commission We are also live via Facebook pages of National Quincentennial Committee, NHCP, PCOO, and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/NQC2021. Follow at NQC2021 on Twitter and Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, National Quincentennial Committee, for more educational materials. Follow also our playlist on Spotify for Bandit Philippines to access the official soundtrack of the Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines. Ngayon, kasama ko ang aking partner moderator na si Ms. Ayesha Sayseng. Hello, Ayesha.
Salamat, Jules. Hello. Ayan, magandang hapon at maligayang 2021 po sa lahat. Muli, ako po si Ayesha Sayseng, Historic Sites Development Officer 2 ng National Historical Commission of the Philippines at miyembro ng NQC Secretariat. Ilan lamang pong paalala, maaari niyo pong gamitin ang Quincentennial Online Lecture Portal sa panonood ng lecture na ito. Mapapanood nyo rin po sa nasabing portal ang lahat ng lectures ng NQC at ng iba pang partner institutions natin. Maaari rin po kayo maka-generate ng e-certificate sa portal. Ang kailangan nyo lamang pong gawin ay mag-sign up sa portal.nqc.gov.ph at tumutok sa live stream ng lecture na ito sa nasabing portal. Ang ating pong lecture ngayon ay ika-17 ng countdown to 500 online lectures. So medyo marami na po tayong lectures na nakonduct. Balikan po natin ang ating ikalabing-anim na lektura noong January 15 lektura noong January 22 kung saan tinalakay ni Dr. Chaz Navarro ang nuances ng mga Spanish archival documents at ibinahagi ang mga paraan kung paano mas mapapahusay ang pagbabasa at pagsasalin ng mga nilalaman ng dokumento upang magamit ng mga nakararaming Pilipino. Dito naman pong February 10, 2021, tinalakay ni Ms. Feliz Prudente Santa Maria sa kanyang ikalabing-anim na lektura ang mahalagang papel at koneksyon ng pagkain sa kasaysayan ng unang circumnavigation ng mundo at sa labanan sa Mactan. Ngayong araw, bubusisiin ng ating tagapagsalita ang katauhan ni Ferdinand Magellan gamit ang ilang available eyewitness description tungkol sa kanya. Kung sakali po na habang nagpe-present po ang ating speaker ay magkaroon kayo ng mga katanungan, feel free to ask question through the comment section of this live stream sa ating Facebook page, and we will accommodate to the latter part them at the latter part of the lecture. For those naman po na nasa loob po ng ating Zoom, pwede niyo pong i-chat lamang sa Q&A portion yung ating mga questions para later ay masagot natin. At upang ipakilala po ang ating tagapagsalita, narito po muli si Jules. Sige po, mukhang nagkaroon tayo ng technical problem sa audio po ni Ms. Nierves, ni Jobs. Ngayon po, ipakilala ko lang po muna ulit ang ating pong resource speaker for this afternoon. So, specializing in the early Spanish colonial history of the Philippines, Dr. Gerona spent many years of graduate and postgraduate research in various archives in the Philippines and in Europe, particularly in Spain, Portugal, and Italy, where he also delivered lectures in prestigious gathering of scholars. As a prolific scholar, he has published more than 30 books and numerous monographs on various topics in national and local history. He is best known for his work on Magellan and is acknowledged as among the few experts in Bicol history. Appointed as one of the 5 members of the panel of experts by the National Quincentennial Committee, Dr. Gerona is currently the director of the Partido Studies Center and the newly created Magellan Elcano Study Center at the Partido State University in Camarines Sur. So again, let us all welcome Dr. Danilo Gerona. Good afternoon po, Dr. Gerona.
Thank you very much. Yes. Let me begin with my. Of course, I would like to express my gratitude for inviting me here to the chairman, Dr. Rene Escalante, to Ayan Alfonso, the head of the National Quincentennial Committee Secretariat, to Ayesha, to Jubes, and to the other members of the staff of the National Quincentennial Committee. I'll be talking today about the Magellan as a tragic hero. Of course, a very, very controversial topic. In fact, there are some people who already reacted about this idea by a hero. First, I would like to clarify, it was given to me a topic. There were actually 2 titles given. Magellan, the victim of illusion, of this vision and illusion, and of course, the other one is that of Magellan as the tragic hero. To put this in context, let me start with the research that has been put into this particular work on Magellan. So let me bring you to a certain journey to doing research on the Magellan history. Can we wait for a moment? There's they're just working on the PowerPoint. Well, anyway, while okay, there it is. Aside from doing research in the archival documents, it's a work that took me about 10 years to really examine and look for materials on the Magellan expedition from the Archivo General de Indias in Seville, in Valladolid, the Archivo de los Padres Agustinos de Filipinas, because of the fact that the Augustinians were the earliest missionary order who came to the Philippines, and a number of them did some post-Magellanic research. They interviewed the people who lived during the time of the Magellan arrival in Cebu, and so substantial materials were also provided by the Augustinians. And of course, from the Torre do Tombo archive in Lisbon, and also from some archives in Italy, because of the fact that Antonio Pigafetta, the chronicler of the expedition, left certain materials which are of significant bearing it's such a significant bearing on the Magellan expedition. But then, aside from doing archival work, we also have to look at the places where Magellan played a crucial role in the history of Magellan, so that we can appreciate Magellan's account history, not only through reading the text, but also by feeling the place, the ambience where he once stood and worked and lived in a way. So here I'm showing you the Castelo de San Jorge, the Sao Jorge, is in Lisbon, where Magellan, when he was young, stayed for a while because he being a member of the uh, lower nobility, Magellan was allowed to stay when he was a young boy in this particular castle where King Manuel lived. And as you will see later on, Manuel played a crucial role in Magellan's life as a sailor. Here's the place where Magellan was born and lived in Sabrosa in Portugal. So, and after Magellan left Portugal, because Magellan decided later on, because the fact that he was not actually given what he was requesting from King Manuel as a sort of a compensation for his work as a member of the Portuguese Navy, Magellan decided to leave Portugal, renounce his citizenship as a Portuguese, and proceeded to Seville. And here, Magellan lived in a certain district in Seville known as Triana, where in the 16th century it became the hub of the Spanish sailors. So, in that particular bayou, Magellan spent his time when he was married and lived in Seville and was married there. Aside from Seville and where Magellan stayed, the other place was Valladolid, an important place also because Valladolid was the place where Magellan and King Charles signed the Capitulacion, or the contract which begins the expedition of Magellan. In fact, in 2018, there was a certain event there, and on the other side, you will see the king welcoming the guests, those who are invited to attend this 500-year celebration, the beginning of the 500-year celebration of the Magellan expedition. And beside me here was the admiral of the Spanish Navy, and there was a big event in the place because it was the place where Magellan and the king began this historic event. There is another place which played a crucial role in the history of the Magellan expedition. This is in Sanlúcar de Barrameda, the port of departure of the Magellan expedition. So here, major expeditions to America would coming from Spain would depart from this area. So coming from the Guadalquivir River in the heart of Seville, it proceeds to this place in Sanlúcar de Barrameda, now under the province of Cádiz, and then off to the Atlantic Ocean and to America, and in Magellan's case, to the Philippines. The man and his global achievement. We have to look at Magellan in the context of this time. In fact, as I said, there were already reactions when we speak of Magellan as a hero. But we have to understand the context of the hero in a larger sense in this particular discussion. First, we have to look at the world of Magellan because apparently it was that particular, it was that world that in a way influenced and shaped the very vision of Magellan, and of course, eventually, what he would do in his life was greatly affected by the environment where he came from. A certain priest, a Jesuit priest, Father Antonio Vieira, once said, God gave the Portuguese a small country as a cradle, but all the world as their grave. The point is that the Portuguese life was essentially connected with the sea. And that was not actually different in the case of Magellan. As a young man, when he reached the age of about his manhood, Magellan decided to join the Portuguese Navy, and by 1510, he was embarking on an expedition to India and eventually to Malacca. Here, Magellan was actually involved in the building of the empire of the Portuguese. And precisely because of the culture at the time, and Magellan was not, of course, insulated from that particular culture. He was just a typical Portuguese who loved going to the sea. It's a part of the adventurous culture of the Portuguese. Apparently, of the 16th century imbibe in some way the typical Renaissance ideal. This is what the Italians would call as the Homo Universale. And Magellan's love for uh, knowledge, for learning, love for exploration was part of this particular Renaissance culture. And this, in fact, Prime Bartolome de las Casas, who was among those who approved of the proposal of Magellan. He was a member of the panel that approved the proposal of Magellan. Gave us a first glimpse as to who Hernando de Magallanes was. I think this was the first picture that we got, although very, very sketchy. Yet it provided a first-hand account as to how another Spaniard would look at Magellan. And it says here, this Hernando de Magallanes must have been a man of courage and in his thoughts and for undertaking great things, although he was not an imposing presence because he was small in stature and did not appear to be himself to be much. So here we have a picture of who Magellan was. Apparently he was short. He was not a very, very imposing personality. And in fact, when Magellan presented his proposal and faced these advisors of Charles V, Magellan did not attract um, so much attention because, as I said, he was an ordinary man in appearance, and more so because he was limping. From what we have, it suggests that Magellan was not walking like a typical soldier, straight with a military bearing, because he was limping. This was, in fact, the reason why Magellan transferred his allegiance, shifted his allegiance from the Portuguese to the Spaniards, because of the fact that when his leg was shattered in the battle in North Africa, he was not granted by Manuel I of Portugal the amount or the compensation he was asking for his disability. And so he decided to go to Spain. And for that reason, he was met by Bartolome de las Casas in this particular case. So Magellan does not possess, you might say, the sophisticated education that many of the Renaissance men had, but he imbibed the particular spirit of the Renaissance, that longing for exploration, that thirst for knowledge. And Magellan was a assiduous researcher. The records would show that in the Archivo General de Indias, for example, it suggests that when Magellan started contemplating exploring the sea beyond America, he did a thorough research in the Casa de Contratación, in the records of the Casa de Contratación in Seville, just trying to figure out how the American continent looked like and finding certain clue that a particular place there would allow him to travel to another part of the world, which because of the fact that he was not convinced that America is the end, is located at the end of the world. He was convinced that there's another place, another territory, probably connected with the landmass of America, or probably separated by a big body of water, and which we now know as the Pacific. We have to consider also the fact that Magellan did a tremendous contribution. It says there, unlike Pizarro and many other voyagers of his time, his ambition was a nobler one than that of the greed of gain. Uh, we have to understand that Pizarro was notorious for uh, his quotation that the Spaniards were sick, by which they were suffering from a particular sickness which only gold can cure. So he was acknowledging the fact that much of the purposes, much of the reasons of the conquistadores for going to America was actually simplified by desire for treasure, for gaining wealth. But here, uh, George Powell would say that it's a different story in the case of Magellan. His ambition was a nobler one than that of the greed of gain, nor was it confined to winning fame and honor for himself. Um, Apparently, Magellan would not even think. I suspect that though it's characteristic of the Renaissance men, yet Magellan was simply overwhelmed by the fact that he wanted to find a place to discover based on what he had already seen. In fact, uh, there was a certain account by Leonardo Argensola that says that Magellan must have already reached the Philippines as early as 1510. And apparently, he did not pursue that because he was a member of the Portuguese Navy. But when he shifted his allegiance, he was curious enough to discover more of what he probably had seen earlier in 1510. And for that reason, he embarked for the Philippines. But it was not necessarily the Philippines that what he was interested in. Um, the document, the memorial he sent to Charles the first at the time was mentioning of the Moluccas, the Spice Islands, but not so much of the Philippines. So it was more of a desire to explore. But then, of course, partly because at our typical sailor at the time, Magellan was interested, of course, to gain not so much that of a treasure, but more of simply providing his family the necessary means to survive. You have to remember that Magellan was married when he left Seville at that time, and he had a 6-month-old child, Rodrigo, and he had to provide them subsistence. So, but it was not so much the money that he was interested in. It was more of something beyond that. But of course, the need to provide subsistence for his family was part of that particular interest of Magellan. He aspired to confer great benefits upon man. He exulted in the thought that he might serve Christianity and civilization. Definitely, that's one of the major concerns of Magellan. We know anybody who has read, for example, the Last Will and Testament of Magellan would realize that Magellan was a very, very pious man. Magellan wrote at least 2 last wills and testaments. One was in 1504, so it seems, and the other one was in when he was embarking for the Philippines in 1517, 1519. Yeah. And it was clear in that particular will the sense of piety of Magellan. He was saying there that if ever I die, I'm going to donate whatever I would get, what would accrue from the benefit that the King of Spain will give me. I donate them to this particular chapel, to this particular church. And he was definitely a very, very pious man. And definitely, when George Makepeace Powell would say that he was interested in bringing about civilization, in contributing, in giving a share to civilization, it's probably had something to do more with finding that particular route to Asia. Was he really thinking of circumnavigating the world? It appears that it does not cross into the mind of Magellan. He was interested in finding uh, a certain path that would bring him to the other side of the world, but not necessarily to circumnavigate the world. But it appears that if ever Magellan was aware that there was a certain territory which we now call the Philippines, Magellan was probably interested in looking at the possibility of exploiting whatever resources there was, not for himself, but for the King of Spain, especially the spices and the gold that were reported to be available in this particular territory. But the question of was Magellan conscious of going back in circumnavigating the world, it appears that it's not what is reflected, at least in whatever few materials we have on Magellan. You would find unknown pathways to the sea. That's of course what's precisely what I've been saying. You would plant the cross in Hitan and I do not lose lands. Very very clear in Magellan's ideals. Despite the terrible ordeal that Magellan had been through, traveling for more than 1 year, 1.5, almost 1.5 years, I think we cannot deny the fact that it was an exceptionally inspiring accomplishment. As Edward Gaylord Bourne, one of the earliest experts on the history of explorations, would say, the first navigation of the Straits of Magellan was a far more difficult problem of seamanship than crossing the Atlantic. Columbus' voyage was over in 35 days, but Magellan's had been gone a year and withered a sub-Antarctic winter before the real task began. Indeed, he in fact had to overcome mutiny in South America. He had to make use of diplomacy just to encourage the men to continue and probably uh, avoid assassination by his very own men. And for that reason, Edward Gaylord Bourne would conclude that Magellan is to be ranked as the first navigator of ancient and modern times. And indeed, his voyage is the greatest single human achievement on the sea. I have, as I said, uh, I have looked at the records and, in fact, in a way, journeyed with Magellan and the expedition and the terrible ordeal, the hunger, the disease, the disgruntled men, the possibility of assassination, of being killed by his own men, the difficulty, hard-headedness of the crew. Magellan had to contend with all these things. But he was headstrong and determined to accomplish what he had begun. And definitely, it must have been a tremendous accomplishment by a man, particularly in that early episode of the age of exploration. It was a tragedy. For one reason, despite the fact that Magellan accomplished so much, as I was saying, Magellan probably did not intend, did not even have a concept that he would be accomplishing that particular feat of what we now call as the circumnavigation of the world. But what he was only interested in is finding a route to Asia, in finding a route to the Spice Islands. And yet, Magellan gave us the world because of the circumnavigation, which he, of course, did not complete. We are able to get a knowledge of our singular humanity, the knowledge that the world is circular. It opens a world of possibilities, not only to Europeans, but even to Asians in the long run. So there's one thing that's quite unfortunate for Magellan, which even Pedro Murillo Velarde, the one who was responsible for giving us that 1438 map of the Philippines, which says, as the first to discover the Philippines, his glory lasts as long as the world remains. But his valor in this achievement hardly found recompense, but only after the lapse of 200 years. So here, Murillo Velarde was writing in 1700s, was aware that gradually Magellan was being recognized only during the time. We have to understand that uh, after his death, Magellan did not get anything. In fact, he was not rewarded, and as also attested by Jose Ferrer de Coto, it was unfortunate because he did not get the rewards and honors conferred by the crown, but someone else was the one who received that. In fact, ironically, Sebastian del Cano, who was among the ringleaders of the mutiny in San Julian, was the one who would receive the award that rightly belonged to Magellan. One thing quite unfortunate for Magellan is the fact that he was disowned by Portugal. The famous poet, Portuguese poet, Luís Camões, once said, "Fired by thy fame and with his king in ire, too much thy deed shall Magalhães aspire." But here he was saying, he was glorifying Magellan, except for the fact that he was not loyal, according to Camões. So it's interesting to know that after Magellan uh, transferred his allegiance to Spain, it is said that his house was vandalized by the Portuguese. There were threats on the life of Magellan, not only on him, but even including his family and including his friends. In fact, some of the relatives of Magellan had to leave Portugal because of the threats coming from the native, the residents, from the more bigot Portuguese to, to kill him, to manifest their protest and anger towards Magellan. He was, when he transferred to Spain, he was not only, he was suspected, despite the fact that he sacrificed and in fact risked his life by transferring to Spain and offered his services to Charles. Some Spanish hidalgos did not like what happened to them because they were thinking. In fact, one of them was giving a proposal to head an expedition, and yet the expedition was given by Charles not to a Spaniard but to a Portuguese, to a subject of a rival country at the time. And for that reason, the Spanish hidalgos did not like Magellan very, very much. And that's precisely the reason why, even at the outset of the expedition, Juan de Cartagena was already beginning to create trouble in the expedition, um, trying to oppose Magellan's command, questioning his authority, and of course, that quarrel broke out eventually in San Julian when a mutiny erupted, led by Cartagena and some other Spanish hidalgos. So, but what is painful, apparently, although Magellan was already dead by this time, among scholars, is the fact that here, when the next expedition after the death of Magellan was sent to Cebu, Hernan Cortes sent a letter to the head of the expedition addressed to Humabon, disowning everything that Magellan supposedly had done. They were blaming Magellan for the massacre, for the discord that occurred between the Spaniards and the natives of Cebu. So instead of um, apologizing in some way, instead of uh, uh, oh no, or sorry, instead of condemning what the Cebuanos did, the massacre, the shift in this allegiance of Humabon from Portuguese to Lapu-lapu, in fact responsible for the death of these 27 or so survivors of the Battle of Mactan. Hernan Cortes even pinned down Magellan by putting every blame on the fiasco of the expedition, and even on the quarrel between the Spaniards and the Cebuans. But not only that, he was formally denigrated by such an important Spanish official as Hernan Cortes, who was the governor at the time of Mexico. But even some royal officials, Peter Martir, the Angera, expressed nothing but hatred towards Magellan. It's quite interesting because in the book of Peter Martir, it's not really elaborated why he developed so much hatred for Magellan. In fact, even saying that, of course, it's good enough that he died because his death is actually only reveals what kind of person he was, that he was a greedy person. That's apparently what Peter Martir was trying to communicate. But it's not very clear why this guy was not even a Spaniard. He was an Italian and one of the more important consultants of Charles V. Developed a terrible hatred for Magellan. Could it be possible that it was it was due to envy? It was simply because probably, we do not really know what's the reason for that. But the other thing is because not only that he was disowned by the Portuguese, suspected and denigrated by the Spaniards, but he was eventually killed by the natives. So the three people who played key roles in the life of Magellan were all only gave Magellan this pain and eventually this death. In fact, Fray Elijah Zamora was aware of this, that it was Magellan's blood which became a sort of a sacred gift to the Philippines. In fact, Father Francisco Colin would even also speak of this, that the reason why Magellan was killed here is because it was to show to the Filipinos that God loves the island. That it was because Christianity, because God had a purpose for coming here, and as a proof of that, that even to the point that someone giving up his life for this particular faith and conversion is worth it, because this is a sign of God's predilection to the Philippines. But who is a hero in this particular case? We have always, in fact, someone gave a very, very, in a way, angry comment when we posted that title in some way of this lecture of Magellan as a tragic hero, because we are always associated our hero with a nation. But we have to expand that a bit. We have to widen the horizon of who a hero is. We always, of course, associated this with a nationalist, with a patriot. But even Rizal himself, in the No Limit Tangery, would say that a hero becomes an important element in a society which is under a colonial regime, under a tyrant. There is a need for a rallying point for resistance, a rallying point for asserting freedom and the rights of the people who had been deprived by a tyrant. But he was saying that after a while, when the world becomes one, when tyrants are no longer present, when justice prevailed in all of mankind, then he was saying that a patriot, a nationalist, will become a superfluity. Because at the end, what we need is a humanist. One who is no longer, whose love is no longer confined to a particular locality, to a particular country, but to the world in general. In this particular case, I gathered certain kind of um, descriptions or insights as to what a hero is, and there were a number of them, of course, then available in the internet. It says, I think a hero is really any person intent on kay. A hero is an ordinary individual who finds to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles. The hero is one who kindles a great light in the world, who sets up blazing torches in the dark streets of life for men to see. True heroism is remarkably sober, very undramatic, of course. All these things. Even Rizal says, it's a useless life that is not consecrated to a great deal. It's like a stone wasted on the field without becoming a part of any edifice. But even Rizal would say, does not necessarily mean that a hero is simply one who loves his particular country. All these quotations suggest to us that there are different varieties, different elements of heroism. It's not only one who is confined to a particular country, one who devotes his life to his country. Of course, it's important. Of course, it's essential. It is essential. It's basic idea of what a hero is. But there is a different kind of hero, a transnational hero, a global hero. And I think that's precisely where Magellan fits into the category of a hero. To end this, I would like to quote what I have written at the end of the book. It says there, Magellan was the tragic hero of history, not only because he died while standing on the threshold of success, he would have accomplished and get the reward that accrued to him, but he died. But also because he was deprived of the material rewards and the royal accolade he rightly deserved. It's unfortunate to know that no one received the benefit that should accrue to Magellan for his services to the crown of Spain, because his wife Beatrice died a few months after hearing of Magellan's death. His son Rodrigo died. We do not know when was that, but definitely while Magellan was on his journey, Rodrigo was already dead. Even the family of Magellan, because Magellan left no heir, because his wife and his son died, he left no heir. And the money that should accrue to him and to his heir was not actually received by any of the rightful heir of Magellan. As Stefan Zweig says, rightly lamented in his book, Columbus and Cortez and Francis Drake have had countless pages written to perpetuate their memory. But Magellan, whose achievement outshadows the others, has been but a name in the history books. One may probably say Magellan was an unfortunate victim of his own greatness. Indeed, hopefully, after 500 years, today, since he gave mankind, the world, mankind may finally give Magellan his word. Thank you very much. Those who are interested to pursue more of our discussions on history, they can probably subscribe to this my channel. It features historical narratives in the early period of Spanish colonial regime in the Philippines. Thank you very much.
Salamat po, Dr. Gerona. Balikan lang po natin yung mga question. Tingnan po natin kung may mga questions po ang ating participants. For the meantime, gusto po nating kamustahin na lang muna yung ating mga participants. Nandito po ngayon at i-shoutout na rin natin Mr. Alfred Yalong, Alvin Asis, Ana Coballes, Apolinario John Bucar, Archimedes Gonzalez, Bernie Eroles, Bem Rivero, Charissa Cebu Crisostomo, Krisha Ruth, Mayo, Dan Vicente, Felix Xavier, Glenmar. Lahat po nandito po sa ating webinar Zoom. Maraming salamat po sa pagsuporta sa National Quincentennial Committee. If ever may question po kayo, mag-cast lang po kayo ng question sa ating Q&A portion. Si Mr. Apolinario po ay nagte-thank you sa inyo po, Dr. Gerona, for putting things in perspective about Magellan. Okay, marami po nagpapa-thank you. Maraming salamat daw po from Miss Ana D. Coballes, Dr. Gerona, for the lecture. And again, if ever you have questions po, feel free to ask via our question and answer portion. At for those na nasa ating pong Facebook, you can ask question through our live stream. Sa Q&A, ito po, may anonymous attendee po na nagtatanong, as a future teacher of social studies, I am curious po kung papaano dapat ipakilala si Magellan sa mga bata nang hindi nagiging bias sa pagiging colonizer nito.
Yeah, of course, it's an interesting question. We have to understand that, first and foremost, Magellan did not intend to come to the Philippines, one thing. Well, it's you might say a collateral damage of the landfall in the Philippines that after a while, the Spaniards were interested to come to the Philippines. Well, the next expedition did not come here to colonize, but they came here more to rescue those who were remnants of the expedition of the Magellan. So I think when we speak about Magellan as a colonizer, it has to be clarified and qualified in some way, because that's not actually very, very clear historically. Although it's very, very easy to judge that Magellan, of course, in fact, one of those who commented yesterday was Magellan Sabile. That's very, very clear to him. But I think it has to be contextualized and historically. He didn't come here, as I said, directly, because did not come here as the purpose of the expedition. You might say he knew the Philippines, but the purpose is, of course, to go to Indonesia, to the Spice Islands. So how are we going to present that to the students? I think we have to present that based on the available materials we have. Was he here to colonize? I think it's a different issue. The idea of colonization came here in 1565, but before that, we doubt whether the real purpose for the coming of the Villalobos and the other expeditions were directly to colonize. At least the Loaiza, the Saavedra were there to gather whatever survivors there were in the Magellan expedition. So I think we have to understand that he came here as one who, we avoid the word, of course, discover, but there's another point we have to clarify, because as I said, when I use in the book Discovery of the Philippines, in the 16th century, the Spanish word descubrimiento carries a different nuance. So at the time when they say to discover, is actually to eventually settle down in a particular territory, but not necessarily in this particular Magellan was not actually determined to bring to the Philippines the colonial rule. He was interested, of course, because of the spices, but it was more in the Moluccas Island. So, as I said, we have to clarify the particular issue about the idea of Magellan as a conqueror.
Thank you so much po, Dr. Gerona. We have another question po. What does from Felix Javier, what does rehabilitating the name of Magellan mean to some circles as being an apologist for colonialism?
Pardon, Ayesha, kindly repeat the question. What? Hello? Ayesha, kindly repeat the question.
Dr. Gerona,
Yeah.
yes, okay po. From Mr. Felix Javier, ang question po ay what does rehabilitating the name of Magellan mean to some circles as being an apologist for colonialism?
Well, of course, we cannot, especially among those who are not, of course, experts or who did not really read the documents and who failed to look at the context of the historical circumstances of Magellan. The idea of Magellan as always as an apologist is of colonialism has been a very, very favorite theme among ordinary people, that he was he came here as to pave the way for colonization, and it was a justification that he, in a way, if we mean by an apologist, that he was actually justifying the colonial regime, the imperialism of Spain at the time. I don't think Magellan was conscious of this. Magellan was simply leading the expedition, and he was interested in going to the Spice Island. At least the records that he presented to Charles was this. He mentioned of the 6 islands in the Spice Islands, and that's where he was interested to go. Was there any idea of bringing about the colonial regime in that particular territory? We don't know, because Charles himself was, in fact, this has not been studied much by historians. When Magellan was about to leave Spain, Charles V issued him what we call 75 instrucciones, 75 instructions. And among the instructions there was by Charles, you bring this particular plant, where you explore the possibility of gold and trade in the territory wherever you are going to make a landfall. So essentially, it's not very clear to me that Magellan's expedition was indeed to pave the way for colonial rule. Of course, as we see in the succeeding events, it eventually, of course, paved the way for the expedition. But it was, as I said, in the case of Magellan, looking at the records, there were no explicit references there giving Magellan an order to subjugate territories. What is clear, apparently, I think, just to elaborate a bit on this, is that to use force only when people refuse conversion. Again, we have to understand that idea that in Spain at the time, in Europe at the time, even in Portugal, the ideal of the Reconquista, which is of course influenced heavily by the Inquisition, says that that Spain or Portugal can make use of force in order to save the people who refuse their salvation. If by the recourse to force people could be saved, then they can employ of that particular force. So this is this principle of buen guerra, that war could only be employed to compel people to accept the faith, because that is only for their own salvation. Of course, you might look at it as an imposition, but you have to again look at it in the context of the 16th century Europeans.
And I believe we have more questions pa. Ms. Juvelyn will ask questions.
We have a question from Ms. Danica Asilia. Can we consider Magellan and Columbus as products of their own time? Do we discard normative values out of the window? I'm struggling with this in teaching Arabic Tanim.
Sorry, your audio is not very, not very audible. Your audio is not very audible. Ayesha?
Okay. I'll repeat po.
Hello, Jobs. Walang audio yun. Okay, just read. Why does rehabilitating the name of Magellan become? No, that I have answered that. Yeah, walang audio, Ayesha.
Sige, mukhang may problem po talaga sa audio ni Miss Jubes.
Yeah.
Ang another question po sa ating Q&A part ng ating Zoom webinar. First question po is, should we honor Magellan? If yes, how?
Well, of course, Magellan should be honored, not of course as a hero of the Philippines, but of course some circles, especially during this 500-year celebration, would honor Magellan for one particular reason. He brings the Catholic faith. That's, I think we cannot deny that. The church, in a way, is leaning towards this the celebration, which puts more emphasis on the arrival of Christianity, which Magellan, of course, is responsible for. As I said, although the expedition was not intended to evangelize because it does not carry missionaries, it only carries 3 secular priests, but it was Magellan who was, in a way, more responsible for bringing about and paving the way for the Christianization of the Philippines, because Pedro de Valderrama was more of a chaplain only of one of the ships. He was not, of course, a missionary. He was not here to convert the natives, but it was more of Magellan's effort to initiate the conversion of the natives of Cebu. So in that particular case, Magellan is being honored as in this particular, as not necessarily as a hero of the Philippines, but more of the church as one responsible for bringing about the faith. So I think we have to put that in that particular context. If ever, for example, we consider Hispanization as having brought us positive contributions in our life as a people, then probably people would look at Magellan in that particular context. I see that in the historical records. For example, the early period of in our history, some of the works, of course, they are written by Spaniards, would always extol the role of Magellan in bringing about development and transformation in the Philippines, not only in matters pertaining to faith, but also in matters pertaining to civilization. By the way, I would like to acknowledge someone, my Facebook friend, Robin Padilla, who acknowledged my contribution, the presentation, says bravo. Thank you very much, Robin. Yes, yes.
All right po. We have one more question po. Actually, we have 1, 2, 3, and one from Facebook po na question. So we will just be accommodating 4. Last 4. Next question po is, why is Magellan featured in the 100 peso banknote during 1929?
100. Ano yun? Why was it featured in 100?
Peso banknote during 1929.
Well, I don't know. It's more of a political decision rather than probably a historical. So it's prerogative of our a state to, of course, to honor whoever is deserves to be honored in that because of certain reasons. Definitely, as I would say, if in the case of of Magellan, even in the early banknotes that we have, in the early paper bill that we have in 1920s, 1930s, Magellan has been honored in the currencies the Philippines because we cannot deny the fact we do not honor him as a hero, as a hero of the Filipinos, but we honor him as having contributed significantly in the development in the country, in the history of our country, at least historically, if not at least culturally, because of the positive contributions that the Spaniards had brought. Of course, we do not deny the fact that there were certain abuses, there were adverse effects on the part of the Filipinos that we got from the Spanish conquest. But again, as I said, we cannot deny the fact that there are certain benefits that the Filipinos acquired by the coming of the Spaniards in the Philippines, which was paid by the landfall of Magellan in the Philippines. Sorry, walang audio. Yes.
Wala po talaga audio si Miss Josie, no matter how hard she try po. Sige, ang next question po natin from Michael Gerald Dealino. Could Magellan's contemporaries had denigrated him for getting killed? For example, it sounded hypocritical for Hernan Cortes, who conquered the Aztecs, to write a seemingly apologetic letter to Humabon.
Yeah, that's, I think, a very good point on Ayesha. I think Hernan Cortes, after conquering the Aztecs and inflicted tremendous pain on the Aztecs, would even denigrate Magellan and complain about Magellan's alleged overstepping the boundary of the duty allowed him by the king. I think it gave us an idea as to who Hernan Cortes in this particular case. In fact, I was really considering the fact that probably was Cortes jealous of Magellan because of what Magellan had attained. He crossed the boundary of what the Europeans thought never existed at all, or probably he had accomplished something which no Europeans at that time would have accomplished. Because Hernan Cortes had made a landfall and conquered the Aztecs. Of course, that's a significant accomplishment. But what Magellan did was to go beyond that, at least in terms of the duration of time spent and the ordeal he went through in the expedition. So it's quite interesting why Hernan Cortes could have written such kind of apologetic letter, condemning at the expense, of course, of Magellan.
For our last question, Dr. Gerona, from an anonymous attendee. Dr. Gerona, I'm just wondering what happened to the family of Magellan when they were being threatened by the Portuguese. Hindi po ba sila tinulungan ng Spanish government or binahaginan man lang ng rewards that were supposedly for Magellan?
Well, as to the relatives of Magellan in Portugal, a number of them migrated to Brazil because Brazil was a Portuguese territory. They left Portugal. Of course, although Brazil was a Portuguese territory, at least it was far from the mainland, the heartland of the Portuguese, which of course were more familiar with what was going on in terms of the Magellan family and what Magellan did to Portugal. So that's one thing. They were vandalized. In fact, one of the, I think, a nephew of Magellan was very angry at Magellan because of the fact that he said, "Look at what you did. We suffered so much because of what you did." But then the family of Magellan in Spain, there was no problem because they were protected by the Spaniards. But so we do not really know what happened after that. We know the family of Magellan in Portugal suffered so much, but not so much in Spain. But what happened afterwards, we don't really know. What did they receive the benefit? In fact, it's of course an interesting issue because as late as 1540s, 1560s, some Magalhaes or Magellan family were claiming that they were actually direct descendants of Magellan, and they even presented documents to show of their connection with Magellan, which of course some historians doubted as they were actually forgeries because they were wanted only to get the benefits that should accrue to Magellan. So imagine it's quite unfortunate. Magellan did not get anything, and people were would go to the point of forging documents in order that they could avail of the benefit that accrued rightly to Magellan. So if ever Magellan had any relative, probably the sons or daughters of his sisters, we don't really know if they were the ones who eventually got it. That, as far as we know in the record, as late as 1560s, and the benefits accruing to Magellan were still being contested by certain people posing as relatives of Magellan.
Thank you so much po, Dr. Gerona, for your lecture. Nabigyan kami ng 360-degree view kung sino nga po ba si Ferdinand Magellan. For everyone na umaten po sa ating Zoom link, thank you so much po for participating, and we apologize po for the technical problems we're having. Huwag po sana kayong magsasawa na suportahan ang Countdown to 500 online lectures. At also, dun din po sa mga participants natin na nasa Facebook live stream, thank you so much po sa pagsuporta sa National Quincentennial Committee. Ayan. Before we end our lecture, let me have a few announcements po. So before we end this live streaming, ito lamang po ang mga major activities ng NTUC na dapat nyong antabayanan. Una, beginning of the 500th anniversary of the Philippine part in the First Circumnavigation of the world and unveiling of the Samar, Homonhon, and Suluan Quincentennial markers na magaganap sa March 16, 2021 sa D1 Eastern Samar. Number 2, declaration of the Basilica Minore of Santo Niño de Cebu, an image of the Santo Niño de Cebu as the national cultural treasure. Ito po ay in line with the 500th anniversary of Christianity in the Philippines na magaganap on April 14, 2020. Kasabay nito ay magkakaroon din ng opening ng Santo Niño Traveling Exhibit in partnership with Agustinian Province of Santo Niño de Cebu and Cebu City Cultural and Historical Affairs Office sa April 14, 2021. At opening ng Philippine Quincentennial Philippine Quincentennial Museum sa Museo Subo in partnership with the City Government of Cebu and Museo Subo. Dapat din abangan sa April 27 or D-Day ng Quincentennial Commemorations sa 500th anniversary of the victory at Mactan na gaganapin sa Lapu-lapu City. Iklaro ko lang po pala, yung pong museum sa museo, yung exhibit sa Museo Subo ay Philippine part in the First Circumnavigation of the world. I-open din po siya this April. Yung gallery po doon sa Museo Subo magpapakita ng Philippine part in the First Circumnavigation of the world. At lastly, opening po ng Manila Metropolitan Theater kung saan gaganapin ang evening show, gala show ng Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines. Ito po yung tinatawag natin D-Day na pangungunahan po ng National Commission for Culture at National and the Arts, National Historical Commission of the Philippines at National Quincentennial Committee. Once again, ang opening po ng Manila Metropolitan Theater ay kasabay ng ating D-Day po, ng ating evening show for the Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines. At lastly, paalala, please don't forget to share this live stream to your friends and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/NQC2021, or follow us at NQC2021 on Twitter and on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, National Quincentennial Committee, for educational videos. Follow our playlist on Spotify, 500 Years Philippines, to access the official soundtrack of the Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines. Last. Upang maging updated sa mga naka-line up na programa para sa Quincentennial Commemorations in the Philippines, antabayanan lamang po ang NQC Facebook page at kita-kits po tayo sa susunod na Countdown to 500 online lecture series. Mabuhay po tayong lahat. At once again, thank you so much po, Dr. Gerona.